Richard Coleman, a 41-year-old millionaire, believed he controlled everything. Business, schedules, even the people around him. At the reception desk of a luxury hotel in Chicago, he publicly humiliated a young employee, proving once again his pride. But fate does not forgive arrogance. Minutes later, his 5-year-old daughter ran into the street, and a tragedy nearly unfolded. And the one who risked her own life to save the child was the very woman he had just belittled in front of everyone. From that moment on, nothing would ever be the same. Chicago's winter dressed the sky in steel as Richard Coleman's private jet touched down. At 41, he disembarked with the same precision he used to sign contracts, never allowing chance even a second of control. The city pulsed outside, but his mind was already racing ahead, parked at the Grand Imperial Hotel. In the car, silence obeyed the rhythm of his watch. Every red light seemed an obstacle to the international meeting awaiting him that afternoon. Beside him, 5-year-old Olivia clutched a stuffed bunny, her eyes fixed on the reflections in the windows. His wife was away on business, the nanny had a scheduled day off, and Richard had accepted the equation as a calculated risk. The hotel rose before them like a ship of marble and glass, chandeliers spilling gold across the lobby. The doorman opened the door with polished choreography, and the scent of lilies replaced the stench of jet fuel. Richard breathed in that luxury as though claiming territory, recovering the sensation that everything was under control. Olivia craned her neck to glimpse the piano in the bar, its keys reflecting stars in her imagination. In his pocket, his planner vibrated. In his soul, a part of him still feared the unforeseen, something no protocol ever consults. He strode toward the check-in counter, convinced that keeping his daughter just a few steps away was enough to ensure nothing would go wrong. Madison Clark, 25, lined up folders and smiles behind the counter, trained to make the pressure of the lobby invisible. She knew the afternoon would bring check-ins for foreign investors, names that looked alike, egos that bruised easily. When she spotted Olivia's reflection in the marble, she noticed curiosity stronger than words, a gaze pulled by lights and sounds. Richard pressed down his passport with authority, eyes darting across emails as if typing themselves. His impeccable manners masked a hurried heart, already negotiating before hearing any greeting. Overhead, a chandelier groaned almost imperceptibly, as though the building itself breathed with the rhythm of millionaire schedules. Olivia approached the counter and touched the polished wood, feeling a vibration that calmed her for an instant. Madison lowered her voice to speak to the girl and raised it again to guide the father, balancing kindness with protocol. From the bar, the pianist released 3 notes that floated like soap bubbles. The child followed them with wide eyes. Richard moved his pen across the forms, convinced he was pulling all the strings in that scene. Yet inside, an old memory whispered of the fragility of caring and working at the same time. At the far end of the lobby, the automatic doors opened and closed on their own, displaying the street like a stage calling for its players. Check-in complete, a concierge escorted Richard to a waiting lounge, where he sat Olivia on the nearest sofa. He distributed distractions: a juice, a muted tablet, a coloring book with crayons, issuing instructions without looking her in the eyes. The little girl nodded with the seriousness of a tiny adult, though her body remained tuned to the piano and the doors. Madison watched the arrangement with discreet attention, ready to intervene if the choreography of the lobby lost its rhythm. Punctual as ever, the team of investors was already arriving, and Richard adjusted his suit like a man putting on armor. Inside his mind, he arranged responses, counterarguments, and projections, leaving no space for human unpredictability. Olivia thought of the stars, hidden inside the piano keys, and the wind she had felt as the car sliced through the city. Chicago pulsed outside, horns and sirens stitching together an invitation only children know how to read. The watch on Richard's wrist vibrated, and he rose with the urgency of someone who believed everything was secured. He promised to return in 5 minutes, measured the distance in steps, and calculated it impossible for anything to break in that interval. At the very instant he crossed into the meeting room, a spark of curiosity lit in Olivia's eyes. And where adults see limits, children find pathways. Exactly the kind of detail that transforms an ordinary day into destiny. The marble hall swelled with guests, rolling suitcases clattering and languages intertwining. Madison Clark typed quickly, maintaining her professional smile even as tension scratched at her neck. Richard Coleman advanced to the counter, posture rigid, gaze demanding immediate efficiency. He handed over documents, slid a golden card, and imposed the tone of a man who tolerated no mistakes. A simple system error had swapped the surname order of a European investor. His haste turned the glitch into an offense, and his voice cut the air like steel. "This is basic, miss. Even a child could do better." The words echoed louder than the piano. Madison swallowed hard, a flush rising to her cheeks, but her fingers corrected the slip in seconds. Curious eyes lifted. Some turned away quickly, others lingered as though reading a modern tragedy. On the sofa, Olivia shrank at her father's tone, clutching the bunny tighter to her chest. Richard gathered the papers like a man winning a battle, ignoring the invisible scars left behind in the silence. And the lobby returned to rhythm, but not without recording that arrogance always leaves its trace. Madison held her composure, straightened her posture, and thanked him with a steady voice. Inside, however, pulsed the memory of years swallowing words to preserve jobs. Her dignity trembled, but it did not collapse. She chose to offer efficiency instead of resentment. Her badge caught the chandelier's light like a fragile shield, yet enough to continue. Richard never looked back. He believed power meant never admitting to a stumble. Olivia watched the scene with wide eyes, not understanding why kindness had no place in those words. She wanted to ask, but fear of disappointing her father sealed her lips. Madison tucked away the image of the little girl, so sensitive to the harsh tone of reprimand. Deep down, she knew life often stitches ironies. Those who humiliate may one day need the ones they scorn. She drew a deep breath, reorganized the desk, and moved on to the next guest. The automatic doors kept opening and closing, as if waiting for the next turn of fate. And between one registration and the next, silence promised there would still be a reckoning. Richard headed for the exclusive lounge, convinced he had restored order and respect. The investors were already waiting, and he slipped into the role of stern host without hesitation. But something burned at the back of his neck, perhaps the echo of his own voice, perhaps his daughter's gaze. Olivia no longer colored. She only twirled a crayon between her fingers, restless. The humiliation hurled at Madison still vibrated in the air, unseen, yet felt by those attuned. While the millionaire spoke of figures and contracts, the city outside moved to a different rhythm. Cars, horns, and the city's sounds composed an invitation that whispered to the little girl's heart. Madison, at the counter, adjusted papers, but her attentive eyes discreetly tracked Olivia. She knew, by instinct, that certain children read the world through doors others never noticed. The golden watch on Richard's wrist marked the hour of the next turn. He believed he controlled everything, not realizing he had already lost the most delicate thread. And in the heart of Chicago, something was about to prove how blinding pride can be. Richard Coleman entered the Grand Imperial Hotel's meeting room like a man stepping onto a stage. Investors awaited with glasses and open folders, each gesture measured by the urgency of business. His firm voice lined up numbers, projections, and promises that seemed unshakable. Outside, in the lobby, Olivia remained seated on the sofa, the stuffed bunny guarding secrets in her lap. The tablet her father had offered lay untouched, its cold screen devoid of magic. She preferred to gaze at the piano in the bar, where unknown fingers drew out melodies that seemed to breathe. The notes leapt like invisible colors, stitching together dreams only a child could understand. Olivia's heart lit up with each chord, as if the world itself spoke to her in secret. Behind the counter, Madison noticed the girl's silent attention, eyes fixed on the music. The receptionist understood what Richard never saw. Here was a soul who read life in rhythms, not in numbers. While business marched forward, the little girl searched in sound for meaning that no report could hold. And the hotel, among crystals and marble, held within its walls two worlds that barely touched. Madison couldn't pull her eyes away from Olivia, though her fingers kept registering guests. She knew the quiet restlessness of someone carrying special needs without crying out for attention. Each movement of the girl was like a signal, a language few could interpret. Olivia swayed gently to the piano's rhythm, as though embarking on a journey. Madison felt an impulse to approach, but restrained herself, remembering the sting of humiliation. Better to remain invisible, even if her heart longed otherwise. Still, her attention stayed ready, alert, like someone watching the wind before a storm. The bunny slipped from Olivia's lap. She picked it up tenderly, then turned her gaze back to the street beyond the doors. The lights of passing cars flickered like city fireflies, hypnotic, beckoning her closer. Madison sensed the girl's focus shifting, from the piano to the automatic doors. A chill ran down her spine, as though the air itself had changed density. And in that fraction of a second, she knew with certainty that something was about to happen. Inside the meeting room, Richard drowned in charts projected across glass screens. His mind orbited around millions, expansion goals, and rehearsed speeches. He believed that keeping the agenda meant keeping the world in order. But he failed to notice that the center of his life was already moving on her own, just a few meters away. Olivia slid off the sofa, her small feet touching the marble as though beginning a game. The piano now faded behind her. The shining street outside called louder. The hotel doors opened and closed like waves, inviting, obedient to any approach. The little girl clutched her bunny, a timid smile lighting her face. Each step was delicate yet determined, as if she followed an invisible melody. Madison closed a guest's folder without hearing her own voice, her eyes locked on the scene. Her heart raced like a drum, sensing danger not yet materialized. And in the city that never sleeps, chance was preparing the stage for an unexpected act. Olivia approached the automatic doors with light steps, as if crossing a magic portal. The sensor detected her small body and obeyed without hesitation, opening the way to the street. Chicago's cold air rushed in like a sudden breath, prickling her skin and stirring her blue dress. The girl took 2 steps outside, her eyes fixed on the lights of cars speeding past. The stuffed bunny swung in her hand, a silent witness to a dangerous adventure. Inside the hotel, guests continued their routines, unaware of the risk about to unfold. A security guard, distracted by a noisy group, failed to notice the silent escape. Madison, behind the counter, lifted her eyes at the exact right moment and saw the scene freeze. Her heart raced as she recognized the blue dress crossing the red line of the carpet. Out on the street, a car turned the corner, its driver paying attention only to the phone in his hand. Time seemed to shrink, compressing danger into a fraction of a second. And Olivia's life, so fragile and precious, was about to collide with the world's carelessness. Madison dropped the pen, the registry pad, and her badge, running before she could think. One of her heels was left behind, but her feet did not stop, pounding over the polished marble. The lobby turned into a racetrack, each step echoing like an urgent drum. The receptionist's eyes saw nothing now but the little girl moving toward the curb. Olivia giggled softly, unaware of the danger, believing she was following stars painted on the asphalt. The car accelerated, the headlight reflecting on the blue dress like a harbinger of tragedy. The bunny slipped from her hand, spinning in the air before hitting the cold ground. Madison stretched out her arms as if she could extend her body beyond human limits. The screech of brakes began too late, the sharp sound slicing the air like a blade. Guests in the lobby lifted their eyes, but were light years away from the scene to intervene. Everything now came down to a single gesture, a race against inevitability. And Madison knew that if she didn't make it in time, nothing would erase the silence to come. The street loomed like an abyss, and Olivia, innocent, was nearly at the edge of the curb. Madison felt her heart explode, muscles burning with desperation. With a final lunge, she hurled her body forward, arms sweeping to grab the child. Gravity seemed suspended, each inch stretched across the wire of eternity. Her hands finally caught Olivia around the waist, yanking her into a sharp spin. They tumbled to the side, scraping a knee against the rough cement. The car shot past within inches, horn blaring, the driver pale from the near disaster. Madison wrapped the girl in her arms, feeling the frantic heartbeat against her own chest. The stuffed bunny lay forgotten on the sidewalk, a mute proof of danger. Olivia cried out, a loud wail ripping the air and restoring life to what had almost been lost. The entire lobby watched in shock, witnesses to a miracle they could barely describe. And on the other side of the meeting room, Richard was about to hear the rumor that would change everything. The rumor swept through corridors and entered the meeting room like an icy wind. Richard Coleman lifted his head, interrupted by an urgent whisper in his ear. The words, "your daughter," were enough to force the air from his lungs. He stood so fast that his chair crashed to the floor with a metallic clatter. The investors exchanged confused glances, but Richard was no longer there. He sped through the corridors in long strides, nearly tripping over his own panic. The doors opened to reveal a lobby full of tense voices and fixed stares. At the center, Madison Clark was kneeling on the floor, still breathless from the sprint. In her arms, Olivia sobbed through tears, clinging to the receptionist's neck. Madison's knee bled discreetly, staining the fabric of her uniform. The stuffed bunny rested on the marble, forgotten in the chaos of the moment. And Richard felt the world spin, crushing him between relief and guilt. He hurried closer, yet each step felt as heavy as lead. Olivia lifted her teary eyes and reached her arms toward her father. Richard gathered her up, feeling the tremor still vibrating in her small body. The child's breathing was ragged, but alive, warm, insistent. The millionaire's heart thundered like an engine out of control, dragging up old losses. Madison raised her gaze, trying to catch her breath and hide the wounded knee. For an instant, their eyes met, locked in an uncomfortable silence. There, the fresh memory of humiliation stood beside the living proof of a rescue. Guests' eyes fixed on the scene, turning the lobby into a courtroom stage. Still stunned, Richard managed only a shaky, almost inaudible thank you. The word was so small it barely reached the young woman before him. And inside him, the feeling was born that he could never repay what had happened. The hotel manager arrived in a rush, bringing towels and hurried cups of water. Madison refused further care, even with pain throbbing in her knee. "She's all right," she said calmly. brushing Olivia's hair with a gentle hand. Richard watched, torn between gratitude and the cruel echo of his own words. The contrast between past arrogance and present fragility burned like hot iron. Olivia, now quiet, gripped Madison's hand tightly, refusing to let go. The simple gesture was like a mirror for Richard, reflecting his own absence. The automatic doors still opened and closed, reminding everyone of the risk from minutes before. The car that had nearly taken his daughter was gone, but its ghost hovered in the air. A weight fell on the millionaire's shoulders, heavy as lead. He had failed, not as a businessman but as a father, and that hurt more than any defeat. And deep down, he knew this would not be the last time he'd have to face that truth. The Grand Imperial Hotel's lobby seemed to breathe more slowly after the scare. Guests whispered in different languages, as if discussing a tragedy that had almost made the news. Richard stood, holding Olivia, feeling her small body gradually calm. Each of the child's sobs hammered his chest, reminding him of seconds that had almost cost him everything. His heartbeat stumbled, tangled up with fear and suffocating relief. Eyes fixed on Madison, he recalled the words he'd used earlier, sharp and cruel. And now, before everyone, that same woman wore on her uniform the mark of courage. The contrast burned like fire. Public humiliation and private salvation. The manager offered to take Olivia to the ER, but Richard refused at once. He asked only for water and silence, as if the world could pause until he grasped what he felt. Madison smoothed her hair, trying to mask the tremor still running through her hands. And without realizing it, Olivia stretched out her hand again, seeking contact. Richard watched his daughter's gesture and swallowed hard, unsure how to react. It was as if Olivia recognized in Madison something he himself could not see. The receptionist leaned forward slightly, taking the girl's hand with care. A brief smile lit the child's face, dispersing the remnants of tears. Rigid, the father realized he was witnessing a bond being born without his permission, and that filled him with as much fear as gratitude, as though he were losing control. The memory of screeching brakes still echoed in his mind, mixed with the blare of the horn. Every detail of the near accident replayed in painful flashes, waking nightmares. Olivia rested her head on her father's shoulder, but her eyes stayed on Madison. Richard looked away, as if avoiding the acknowledgement of a debt growing in silence. Conversations in the hotel resumed their rhythm, but nothing felt the same. And the millionaire understood there was no contract capable of buying that rescue. Hours later, in the private lounge, the weight still pursued him. Olivia played quietly with her recovered bunny, calmer now. Madison, injured as she was, returned to the counter, refusing to be sent home. The manager regarded her with discreet admiration, and some guests with evident respect. Richard, however, remained restless, pacing like a caged beast. His pride locked his mouth, unable to say what his heart was shouting. From within came a question that scraped like glass. What if she hadn't run? The emptiness of that thought made him break into a cold sweat, even in air conditioning. The arrogance that had sustained him for years now felt as fragile as crystal. And for the first time in a long time, Richard feared not just losing deals, but losing what mattered. In the glass door, the city lights flickered, indifferent to his inner drama. And he knew, what had begun that afternoon was far from over. Richard Coleman crossed the hall carrying Olivia, but the weight he felt did not come from her body. It was conscience crushing his chest, reminding him of the humiliation he'd hurled hours earlier. His eyes searched for Madison, still standing behind the counter, her uniform marked by the scraped knee. He wanted to thank her, but the word felt far too small for what she had done. Guests' eyes followed him, perhaps expecting a gesture of greatness that would never come easily. Richard opened his mouth, but the sound died before it took shape. He managed only a hoarse thank you, too low for everyone to hear. Madison tilted her head slightly, accepting with serenity, as if asking nothing in return. Silent, Olivia held the receptionist's hand, refusing to let go. The child's gesture hit him squarely, reminding him that true bonds ask no permission. The air in the lobby was heavier, as if still holding the echo of the car's horn, and every gaze present bore witness to a pride on the verge of collapse. Madison took a deep breath and focused on her work, even with her hand throbbing. The discipline she had learned in life did not allow her to falter under watchful eyes. She knew she had saved a life, but she didn't want it to turn into a spectacle. Her heart, however, still raced every time she remembered the girl at the edge of the street. Richard, standing a few meters away, watched in silence, unable to leave. It was as if an invisible magnet held him there, fixed to a scene that would haunt him forever. Olivia rested her face on her father's shoulder, but her eyes remained on Madison. In the child's features there was a glow of recognition he couldn't explain. Guests slowly returned to their routines, but the mood did not dissipate. The episode hung in the air, an uncomfortable reminder that arrogance protects nothing. Richard held his daughter tighter, yet felt it wasn't he who gave her peace, and that realization cut deeper than any public humiliation. In the quiet of the lounge, while Olivia drew in her notebook, Richard tried to pull himself together. The noise of investors in another room sounded distant, almost irrelevant. Each line the girl sketched brought back the scream of brakes on the street. He knew that almost could have turned into forever in a matter of seconds. On the table, the folder of contracts seemed worthless now, mere paper before a human life. Richard closed his eyes, recalling Madison's serene expression even after the scare. Her courage was the exact opposite of the contempt he had hurled at her earlier. That contrast ate at him, forcing him to question who truly held power. Outside, Chicago's lights flickered, indifferent, as if nothing had happened. But inside him, the entire city seemed to have changed color. Olivia tugged her father's arm and showed him the drawing. A little girl smiling next to another woman. And Richard understood that his daughter's gratitude spoke what he still did not know how to say. Dawn crept slowly over Chicago, yet inside the Grand Imperial Hotel time seemed suspended. Richard Coleman did not return to the meeting room, despite pressure from his assistants. He chose to remain in the lounge, watching Olivia quietly play with her recovered bunny. The street scene wouldn't leave his mind, looping painfully like a waking nightmare. Every distant horn made him flinch, recalling the car that had almost taken his daughter. The pride that had upheld his image of an unshakable man now cracked in fissures. In his memory echoed the words he had flung at the receptionist, sharp and cruel. The contrast with her courage burned like an open wound refusing to close. He wondered how he would have faced his wife if the worst had happened, and the answer frightened him more than any financial crisis he had ever faced. Olivia, innocent, simply colored with crayons, smiling to herself now and then, and the simplicity of that gesture reminded him how much he had to lose. At the counter, Madison Clark stood straight, even with the throbbing pain in her knee. She had declined the manager's invitation to clock out and rest, claiming she was fine. Her discipline came not only from work, but from a life shaped by silence and overcoming. Even so, she couldn't help glancing at Olivia from time to time. She saw in that child something familiar, perhaps the sensitivity of one who sees the world differently. She remembered her younger brother, also special, and how she had learned to decipher his language. The girl's eyes told her more than words ever could, and deep down, Madison knew she was witnessing a bond being born against all the rules. She sought no recognition. She was simply grateful she had arrived in time. But she also carried the mark of the humiliation she had suffered hours earlier. The memory still stung, even though it had been swallowed by the urgency of life. And that mix of pain and strength showed in every gesture as she served another guest. Richard watched her from afar, hidden behind the lounge's glass curtain. He studied every movement, every restrained smile, every time she masked the pain. He could not understand how someone could be so resilient after being belittled. He felt ashamed of lacking the courage to approach, afraid to face his own faults. When Olivia noticed her father watching, she lifted the drawing she had made. It showed two figures holding hands in front of a brightly lit hotel. Richard recognized himself only as a shadow in the background. At the center stood the girl and Madison, side by side, smiling as if they were one. His heart tightened, crushed by a truth he couldn't name. He realized his daughter had already chosen the person who made her feel safe, and that forced him to face the question he had been postponing. Who had truly failed that day? The lobby's silence seemed to wait for the answer he still lacked the courage to give. Chicago's morning painted the sky in gray and gold, reflected in the Grand Imperial Hotel's windows. Richard Coleman had not slept through the night, replaying the near accident on a loop. Olivia woke early, smiling, as if life had moved on without scars. But he still felt his heart trapped between guilt and gratitude, unable to decide which weighed more. While dressing for another day of meetings, he hesitated in front of the mirror. The image returned an elegant man, but the tired expression revealed internal fractures. On the table lay his daughter's drawing, she and Madison holding hands. Richard shut his eyes, unable to ignore the meaning that leapt from the page. It was as if Olivia had captured in color what he refused to accept. Behind his pride, the fear of losing his daughter gnawed at him in silence. With every heartbeat, he remembered how close he had come to losing her, and that memory pushed him into unfamiliar territory, asking for help. Down in the lobby, Madison was already on duty, following protocols with the same serenity. Her knee still hurt, but she let nothing show but professionalism. When she saw Olivia walking hand in hand with her father, she smiled discreetly. The little girl ran to the counter, showing the receptionist last night's drawing. "You and me," she said sweetly, pointing to the colorful figures on the paper. Madison's heart clenched, but she answered lightly, brushing the child's hair. Richard, standing behind, watched the scene with eyes he couldn't decipher. It was vulnerability. It was shame, something pride could not name. He took a deep breath and, before his courage fled, stepped closer. "How did you know what to do yesterday?" he asked, voice low and measured. Madison turned in surprise but answered simply, without seeking credit. "My brother is special, like Olivia. I learned to see the world through his eyes." The words fell on Richard like a gentle hammer, breaking his last defenses. There was no heroism in her tone, only truth born of experience. He nodded slowly, feeling his throat tighten, as if speaking for the first time without a mask. "I don't know how to handle her the way I should," he admitted, his gaze dropping to the floor. It was a confession he had never made, not even to his wife. Madison held his gaze steady without judgment, only understanding. "She doesn't need perfection, only presence," she said gently. Richard swallowed hard, aware those words carried more weight than any contract. Olivia took the receptionist's hand and then her father's, joining the two. The simple gesture burned like a truth impossible to ignore. Richard drew a deep breath, but in his chest there was no longer only gratitude. There was the beginning of transformation. And the millionaire knew that from that moment on, nothing could go back to the way it was. In the manager's office at the Grand Imperial Hotel, Richard Coleman sat before the screen. The security camera footage showed what he was trying to forget. Olivia walking toward the automatic doors, her blue dress swaying lightly. The sensor opening the way to the street, as if it were an invitation with no return. The car appearing at the corner, headlights on cruel destiny on a direct course. And then Madison Clark, abandoning the counter, running as if the floor were on fire. The heel left behind, her body launched toward the defenseless child. The desperate grab, the sharp spin, the car braking in vain. The receptionist shielding Olivia with her own body, thinking nothing of herself. Richard's stomach churned, his fists clenching until the knuckles whitened. It was impossible to deny the truth. His daughter was alive because she acted, and the memory of his cruel words echoed like a poison that now shamed him. The manager mentioned something about security protocols, but Richard barely listened. His mind was submerged in those images, replaying in slow motion inside him. There were no deals, contracts, or strategies capable of changing that fact. He, with all the power he possessed, had been unable to protect his daughter. And the young woman he had humiliated minutes before the incident had done the impossible. Shame was acidic, corroding every wall he had built around himself. Madison appeared on the screen, steady, resolute, even as blood ran from her knee. Richard realized he had never seen such courage in a real crisis. The sense of debt crushed him, suffocating him more than any business pressure. He closed his eyes and saw the scene replay again, without mercy. The horn, Olivia's cries, Madison's embrace. Everything stitched into a single thread. And he knew that thread could never be undone, no matter how hard he tried to deny it. Leaving the office, Richard walked silently down the corridor, feeling smaller than his own footsteps. Olivia was waiting for him in the lounge, sketching the little bunny on a sheet of paper. Madison, still standing at the counter, was helping another guest with a professional smile. He stopped, looking at them both, as if seeing two halves of a truth he could no longer avoid. His daughter had chosen to trust that woman, and he, despite his pride, needed her too. His mouth opened, but the words stuck in the knot of his throat. His mind screamed that he should apologize, but his heart still wavered. It was like crossing a fragile bridge that could collapse at any moment. Olivia noticed him and smiled, holding up the drawing to show him. In it, the figures held hands, smiling before the brightly lit hotel. Richard swallowed hard, unable to hold his daughter's gaze for long, and he realized the cruelest proof wasn't on the screen. It was in the eyes of the one he loved most. By late afternoon, the lobby of the Grand Imperial Hotel was crowded with guests and executives. Richard Coleman came down the stairs with Olivia in his arms, his heart still heavy. He knew he carried an invisible debt, costlier than any figure. Eyes followed him, curious, recognizing in the millionaire a symbol of power. But at that moment, power was exactly what he did not feel. As he approached the counter, he found Madison Clark assisting another guest. He waited in silence until she finished, each second hammering in his head. When he finally had her attention, he drew a deep breath, pride tightening his throat. Olivia, as if she knew what was about to happen, smiled and held his hand. Richard faced the receptionist, and his voice came out steady yet laden with emotion. Today, in front of everyone, I want to say, I was wrong. I disrespected you. And even so, you saved what is most precious to me. Silence fell over the lobby, everyone holding their breath before an unexpected moment. Madison's eyes widened, surprised by the public confession. Her heart raced, recalling the humiliation she had suffered hours earlier. She had never imagined that man could admit something like this in front of witnesses. She looked at Olivia, who smiled innocently, and felt the strength of a bond being born. In a calm voice, she replied only, "Thank you for saying that." The words were simple, yet heavy with dignity and forgiveness. Guests nearby began to applaud discreetly, as if validating the scene. The hotel manager watched in silence, impressed by the courage of both. Richard lowered his eyes for an instant, relieved to have crossed the bridge. But he knew that gesture did not erase what had happened. It merely opened space for change. Madison returned to work, but a different light lived in her eyes. And Olivia, squeezing her father's hand, seemed satisfied to see the pieces fall into place. For Richard, that public retraction was harder than any negotiation. It was like signing a contract with no letters, only with his own vulnerability. He realized that true respect cannot be demanded. It can only be earned. When he lifted his gaze again, he met Madison's, and she returned a respectful nod. There was no resentment there, only the serenity of someone who knew she had already done her part. Olivia asked to go to the piano, and Richard went with her for the first time without hurry. He sat beside her, watching her little fingers tap random keys. The sound was simple, but it filled his heart more than any gala music. As his daughter laughed, Richard felt the weight in his chest ease for a few seconds. But he also sensed he was only at the beginning of a long transformation. Pride still wrestled with gratitude, and that battle was far from over. And deep down, he knew the real test was yet to come. The next morning, Richard Coleman returned to the Grand Imperial Hotel's meeting room. Folders lay on the table, investors waited, but nothing felt the same. He opened the presentation, yet the prepared words sounded hollow even to himself. The image of Olivia running toward the street still replayed in his mind. And the image of Madison Clark diving to save her rose like a living scar. He drew a deep breath, closed the laptop, and abandoned the rehearsed script. Curious eyes lifted, surprised by the unusual gesture. Richard began to speak not about projections but about people. He explained that success was not only in numbers, but in whom we have the courage to value. He promised to invest not only in business, but in safety and accessibility. The audience listened with uncommon attention, mesmerized by the unexpected sincerity. And each word seemed to rebuild a man who until then knew only the language of pride. As he spoke, Richard watched Olivia in the back, doodling in her colorful notebook. She smiled quietly, indifferent to the figures, yet fully present in the moment's essence. The drawing again showed Madison holding her hand, this time with Richard beside them. It was as if the child already saw the bridge he was still trying to cross. The investors exchanged glances, intrigued by the millionaire's raw honesty. It was rare to see someone with so much power speak of vulnerability without masks. When he finished, the silence lasted a few seconds before applause filled the room. Richard lowered his eyes, moved, yet still reluctant to show too much. He realized, however, that something had changed in how others saw him, not just as a businessman but as a father, as a man. And that change, strangely, brought him a relief he never found in contracts. It was as if he had finally signed the most important agreement of his life. From the counter, Madison watched discreetly through the half-open door. She couldn't hear every detail, but she caught the tone, the change, the transformation. Her eyes grew moist as she remembered how that same man had humiliated her. Now, before so many, he showed himself human, imperfect, yet willing to learn. She felt her pain hadn't been in vain. It had become something greater. When Olivia noticed the receptionist looking, she waved with the stuffed bunny. Madison answered with a discreet smile, like someone keeping a precious secret. The hotel manager approached and whispered, "You did more than save a life." She simply lowered her eyes, humble, but her heart warmed at the words. Richard left the room minutes later, his face tired but relieved, looking for his daughter. He found her playing near the piano, happy as if the world were in order. And he knew that morning he had taken the first step toward becoming a different man. In the Grand Imperial Hotel's lobby, the afternoon flowed with its comings and goings. Richard Coleman watched Olivia play near the piano, while his heart still felt heavy. The meeting had ended, but Madison's words echoed in his mind. He saw her at the counter, organizing documents with the calm of someone who asked for no applause. He breathed deep, gathered courage, and approached, without the old armor of arrogance. Madison looked up, surprised, yet kept her serenity. "I want to thank you again for what you did, and for what you taught me without realizing it." The sentence came out firm, but his voice carried vulnerability. Olivia ran up to them, proudly bringing the drawing of holding hands. "It's the three of us," she explained with innocence, her smile lighting her face. Richard swallowed hard, moved by the simplicity with which his daughter saw the world. And he understood that that colored paper was worth more than any signed contract. Madison held the drawing carefully, as if it were made of glass. Her eyes grew misty at the way Olivia included her in the scene. She thought of her brother and the silent language she had learned to decipher. "She sees beyond words," Madison said softly, handing the paper back. Richard nodded, feeling his throat tighten. "I don't know how to handle her when the world gets too heavy," he confessed. It was the first time he admitted it in front of someone outside the family. Madison drew a breath, choosing her words with care. "She doesn't need you to know everything. She just needs to feel you're with her." The silence that followed spoke louder than any speech. Richard ran a hand through his hair, as if accepting the lesson. And Madison realized she was standing before a man in the process of change. The manager watched from afar, a silent witness to that improbable dialogue. For a moment, Richard let the mask of the unyielding businessman fall. He was just a father, asking for help in the only way he knew how. Madison offered to prepare a simple guide of routines that might help Olivia. "I can write down some things I use with my brother, if you'd like." Richard lifted his eyes, surprised, and answered sincerely, "I would, please." The light in his eyes wasn't business, it was hope. Between them, Olivia smiled as if she already knew the bridge had been built. The piano began to play again in the background, soft notes stitching the moment together. The lobby returned to its normal rhythm, yet nothing there felt ordinary. Richard said goodbye with a respectful nod, carrying away more than gratitude. He carried the certainty that encounter had changed the course of his own life. The next day brought sunlight glinting off the Grand Imperial Hotel's glass windows. Richard Coleman was heading down with Olivia for breakfast when an unexpected alarm sounded. A technical test had triggered the emergency system, filling the lobby with shrill noise. The sirens sliced the air like a blade, echoing off marble and crystal chandeliers. Olivia froze in the middle of the corridor, her whole body stiff with fear. Her wide eyes searched for refuge, but the sound was too overwhelming. Richard knelt before her, heart racing, trying to recall what he'd heard from Madison. He placed his daughter's hands on his chest and spoke softly, "Feel Daddy's heart." Together, his breathing was uneven, but Olivia began to synchronize with the rhythm. She pressed the bunny tight against herself, as if it could help push the noise away. Panic slowly receded, and the crying gave way to a trembling sigh. Richard realized that, for the first time, he was managing to reach her in the middle of the chaos. Madison appeared discreetly with a blanket in her hands, coming from the kids' club. She crouched beside them, offering the soft fabric to wrap the little girl. Olivia accepted the gesture and nestled into her father's embrace, protected by the blanket. The receptionist remained calm, suggesting a quieter corner behind a screen. There, away from the shrillest sound, the child's breathing returned to its natural rhythm. Richard lifted his eyes to Madison, and the gratitude came silently in his gaze. It was different from the forced thank you before. This one was genuine. The alarm ceased minutes later, and the lobby resumed its busy routine. But for Richard, that pause had been a revelation. He realized that the right presence could turn panic into peace, and that he, still learning, had taken a real step toward his daughter. Madison only smiled, as if confirming without words that they were on the right path. Later in the room, Richard watched Olivia sleep, still clutching her bunny and the blanket. The recent memories pulsed like a film too hard to forget. The car screeching on the street, the sirens slicing the air, Madison's serene gaze in the middle of chaos. Everything seemed to weave a story he hadn't written, but was now living. He felt pride give way to the need to learn how to be a true father. It was a learning without formulas, built of mistakes, scares, and small victories. He remembered Madison's words, "She doesn't need you to know everything, just to be there." And he understood he was finally beginning to walk that path. The room's silence was different now. Not empty, but full of presence. Outside, the city pulsed as always, but Richard no longer saw it the same way. His heart beat more slowly, as if it had found a new rhythm, and he knew the coming days would still bring challenges to test him again. The last day of the event at the Grand Imperial Hotel gathered executives, guests, and staff in the main lobby. Richard Coleman asked the manager for a few minutes, requesting that the whole team be assembled. The murmur of the crowd ceased when he appeared beside Olivia, more serious than ever. With his daughter holding tightly to his hand, he faced the attentive faces before him. "I want to publicly thank someone who did more than fulfill a duty," he began. Glances crossed, trying to guess the reason for his unexpected speech. Richard took a deep breath and turned his eyes to Madison Clark, standing at the counter. "This young woman saved my daughter's life, even after I disrespected her. And for that, I announce the creation of a scholarship fund in her name. It will be an annual commitment to support professionals in hospitality and accessibility." His words were met with surprise and emotion, echoing through the luxurious hall. Applause erupted, strong and spontaneous, as if justice had finally found its stage. Madison, stunned, placed a hand on her chest, unable to believe what she had heard. She had never expected public recognition, least of all from someone like Richard. Her heart swelled with silent pride, not for herself, but for knowing Olivia would be remembered. She approached cautiously, receiving a letter of thanks from the millionaire's hands. Olivia, smiling, ran to hug the receptionist around the waist, drawing discreet laughter. The girl's pure gesture brought tears to those who witnessed the scene. Madison bent down and returned the hug, gently caressing Olivia's hair. The hotel manager, moved, declared it would be an eternal memory for everyone. Richard stood in silence for a few seconds, absorbing the scene before him. There were no figures, reports, or contracts capable of measuring that instant. It was the truest recognition he had ever witnessed in his life. And for the first time, he didn't care who saw him vulnerable. When the applause faded, Richard stepped closer to Madison once again. "I can't erase what I said, but I can try to be better from here on," he confessed. She nodded, asking for nothing more, and simply replied, "That's enough." The simplicity of her words pierced the millionaire like an arrow. Olivia, still hugging the receptionist, whispered softly, "My friend." Richard smiled, moved, realizing his daughter had chosen her long ago. The piano in the background began to play, as if quietly celebrating the scene. Guests resumed their routines, but carrying the vivid memory of what they had witnessed. Madison returned to the counter, her badge reflecting the golden light of dusk. Richard carried Olivia in his arms, feeling lighter, as if he had fulfilled a greater duty. The city of Chicago lit up its lights, indifferent to the human drama just played out. And in that indifference, he discovered a value the world rarely measures: true gratitude. Chicago's twilight painted the city in gold as Richard Coleman crossed the lobby of the Grand Imperial Hotel one last time. Olivia walked beside him, clutching her stuffed bunny tightly, smiling at everyone she met. Madison Clark remained at the counter, organizing documents, discreet as always. Richard stopped in front of her, his heart racing as if facing the hardest negotiation of his life. "Madison," he began, voice firm yet gentle, "I want you to know my recognition doesn't end here. If you ever wish to advance your career, count on me. And if you ever wish to visit Olivia, you will always be welcome in our home." The receptionist's eyes widened, surprised by the unexpected generosity. Olivia ran to her, handing over the drawing she had kept with care. On the paper, the three figures holding hands stood before the lit-up hotel. Madison held the drawing like a treasure, discreet tears filling her eyes. And for the first time, she smiled without restraint, feeling she had found a place in that family's heart. Richard left the hotel with lighter steps, as if leaving part of himself behind. Not the arrogant, relentless part, but the weight of pride that had almost cost him everything. The city's cold air felt less biting, replaced by a strange sense of peace. Olivia, in the car seat, repeated cheerfully, "My friend Madison." The millionaire smiled, moved, realizing his daughter had taught him more than any investor ever could. As the driver followed the illuminated avenues, Richard looked out the window and reflected. With all the money he had, he could never have bought that moment. It was a gift given by a simple woman who carried courage greater than fortune. In the rearview mirror, the hotel slowly disappeared, but the memory would not fade. Richard felt transformed not only as a father but as a man. He realized true power is not measured in numbers, but in who we are when life demands courage. And that night, he promised himself never again to ignore what truly mattered. The car pulled away through Chicago's bright streets, carrying with it a new story. Olivia dozed off in the back seat, serene, the bunny nestled in her small arms. Richard watched her in silence, a knot of gratitude tightening in his throat. Madison remained in his mind, not as a receptionist, but as a symbol of humanity. Fate had woven their paths with invisible threads, turning arrogance into learning. The hotel, a silent witness, kept the echoes of applause, tears, and confessions. And in that unexpected crossing, 3 lives had been marked forever. Richard knew nothing would ever be the same. Pride had given way to love. The future remained uncertain, but now there was light enough to guide them. The city pulsed outside, but inside him reigned an unfamiliar calm. The door that once opened only outward had now opened inward. And at last, he discovered that redemption is the greatest luxury anyone can possess. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell so you don't miss any new videos, and of course, leave your like, because that helps the channel continue bringing moving stories like this one. Thank you so much for your support.